We are here today, very excited to talk with Brittaney of Adelynn Photography about inclusive language for us wedding photographers, and not just wedding photographers. This goes for everyone, and I think a lot of the things that hopefully we're going to talk about today will apply to life in general too, right? I hope so. So without further ado, let's hear from Brittaney and let's hear about how you got into wedding photography and your background in all of this stuff that we're about to talk today.
Okay. I'm Brittaney, for those of that don't know. My wife and I own Adelynn Photography. We got into the photography business and wedding photography because back in 2020, when we were searching for our own photographer for our wedding, we ran into which a lot of LGBTQ couples run into, and in this area specifically. I can't speak for every area, but a lot of rural areas, photographers that didn't feel comfortable working with us because of who we are, who we identified as. So Katherine and I kind of came together. I have a background in video production. I've been into photography ever since I was a little kid. My uncle's a photographer as well, and he's the one that taught me the love for it, I guess, introduced me. So we put our heads together and we're like, let's, start our own business and work with people in our community, so people in our community have somebody to represent them and who don't feel that non-inclusive, I'm trying to think of the word, that non-inclusivity, the non-welcoming energies that we felt when we were looking for our wedding photographer. So
now, when you were looking, were you looking specifically for a photographer that was comfortable, or were you just looking for a photographer like anyone else would? So did your search include looking for an LGBTQ friendly photographer, or were you just looking for a photographer?
So for those that don't know, my wife is transgender, and she is very public shy. So having somebody, and she's also camera shy as well. You wouldn't know it because I post her everywhere, but and when you meet her, she's very personable and everything like that. But she was very nervous for our wedding day, having someone who didn't know our background, where we came from, that kind of thing. So like when we were looking for a photographer, we were looking for specifically an LGBTQ photographer, somebody who was versed in our community, versed in some of the language that we use and everything like that. And we just were not having any luck.
Yeah, and that's definitely the biggest thing that, at least for me, and I think a lot of us want to know, is how to use the language better. My background, it's not a big, there's no major story here for me, but, I grew up in a family that was very accepting of all humans, and which I feel like in Lancaster County is a little different. My grandma actually, she lived in New York, in Millbrook, New York, and she rented from a gay couple, and they were lovely. And, they rented her out this mansion of a home. It was gorgeous, and she couldn't afford much, and they rented to her because they just loved Rita. And, so I would go and visit her, and they lived right next door in like the mansion next door. And, they'd be out in, their bonnets. And I just thought it was so cool, actually. And so not only that, but my grandma had a lot of other people in her life, and she always has, that, that are, gay couples. And I grew up being around or visiting. So it wasn't unusual for me personally, but I will say, though, that even though it wasn't unusual for me to, see couples of same sex and transgender and things like that, there was still this level of language that was like, like when my parents or even my grandma would say like, oh, this couple, they're gay. and it was like this whole using the language was still this, like, it was almost like you were saying a bad word. So I think that has kind of followed me through my life. And I think a lot of us too, because using those words a lot of times is used like a bad word, or it's used as a negative. So it's hard to say the words because we feel like we're being rude or something like that. So I guess I'm just really today hoping to get some more information about how best to use these words, and to not feel like I'm offending when I'm trying to do my very best.
So gay is a very and it's a very umbrella term. And usually when people from outside of the community say gay, they kind of look at the whole community. And for us in the community, gay means two masculine presenting people. So that can be two men, two trans men, anybody that is masculine presenting.
Okay.
When it comes to lesbian, lesbian is two females that are presenting female, that identifies female. Then you have queer, which is kind of questioning in a sense. They're kind of, and it can fall under the non-binary umbrella as well. Non-binary is where they don't identify as a male or female. They kind of just identify as a human. And that is becoming a lot more popular. Not really, I don't want to say popular, that would a lot more present, a lot more known. It's always been around. Just like with transgender's always been around. It just wasn't really talked about. There wasn't a whole lot of education. I know for me personally, growing up, I heard gay a lot. My family too was very open and accepting. My mom, right off the gate, taught me that you don't judge a book by its cover, and you always ask questions if you don't understand something. She had a lot of LGBTQ friends growing up. And when I came out, and it's kind of funny because like when I came out, they're like, yeah, we already knew. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, why couldn't you help me out with this? Like, but my mom was like, you had to do your own path, you had to choose your own path, and that kind of thing. So like it is becoming more talked about. It is a subject that's becoming more talked about, these different gender affirmations and topics and stuff. And I don't want to say categories, but like, parts of the LGBTQ plus community. We have, asexuals who are often non-binary as well. They, their identity is different. So it is a constant learning curve for anybody that is wanting to learn and who isn't part of the community.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that constant learning curve makes it tough for people to constantly be educating themselves as to what's new in the LGBTQ plus community and how to best serve them. And I'm going to dive right into a question that I think a lot of people want to know the answer to. So for anybody who's just here because they want to like get that quick hit and run away because they are busy, I'm just going to go ahead and dive in and ask, how do we pose couples that are in the LGBTQ community? Like, how do we, I have my own beliefs and thoughts, but I'm not even going to lay that on the table because I'm probably wrong. So let's just hear from you. What should we be doing here when it comes to posing?
So one of the things that we do is we always ask, you can pose a man in a dress, that you can pose them in a masculine pose, you can pose them in a feminine pose, you can pose them in, kind of both, you can inquire both. So we always ask our couples when we are having that interview process. And a lot of this is done in the interview process. We send the inquiry form, we have a specific section, what are your pronouns, that kind of thing. So when we are in the interview process, we ask them, do you like more masculine poses? Do you like more feminine poses? And that way, like, you can kind of plan ahead, but also because you're a guru with posing. So um, you're like the master of posing. So yeah,
You're so sweet.
we just ask, we just say, do you like to be posed more masculine? Do you like to be posed more feminine? And sometimes too, you can kind of tell from the personality, their personality, but yeah, always ask.
Yeah. So, but we're not going to just assume that because someone with he, her, or she, her pronouns, just because she shows up in a suit doesn't necessarily mean that she wants to be posed as the guy, like in the masculine way. Yes, I think the very first session I shot with two girls, and one was dressed in, a suit, and one was dressed in a dress. I tried for like half the session just to like guess, and I was nervous. So I was just kind of doing what I could do. And you know what we all say, like, well, I don't really see the difference. Like, I see everybody as just human, and that's great. But we also like need to know. Right. So like at some point in the session, I was like, why don't you girls just tell me? Why don't you just tell me? Can you just tell me, like, is this okay what I'm doing with you? Or would you prefer to switch it up? Or let's just lay it on the table. But what you're saying is that you do it in an interview process ahead of time, which, wow, that would be so helpful. So
Yes.
let's go back to the beginning. Let's take everyone through the actual process of booking and like the whole wedding process. So let's say someone's looking for a photographer. What are ways that we can create a website experience for people that is showing that we are accepting of all? And like let's give both examples. So for you, Brittaney, you're specifically almost seeking out the LGBTQ community because that's your ideal client. Your ideal client is someone in the LGBTQ community. And then like someone like me, I would love to do both. I have couples ranging from all different groups of people. So how would we go about that? I think the majority of us are kind of more in my boat than your boat, but let's talk through both. How would you structure your website? Like, how do you structure your website?
So I very much showcase a lot of, I'm a loud and proud girl. So my website is very loud, very proud. Like first off the bat, first picture you see is two females. If and then you go into the website, and then we have the other sections and everything like that. I do have some hetero couples on my website, but the first front page is very loud, proud, this is who we are, that kind of thing. I think for a website, at least if I were a client looking for a photographer for LGBTQ, I would look for, and then that's what I kind of did building my website. I kind of be like, well, what do I want to look for? Like, what would I want? I would look for work examples of same-sex couples. I would also work for more inclusive language. So when you fill out the questionnaire, the biggest thing, and Samantha does this too, has the pronouns and everything, like what your preferred pronouns are. That's a big thing. But as far as like just first click, just having some kind of picture to showcase, because we're all visual people. We're all visual people.
That's something that's missing from my website is the pronouns, because I keep saying, well, I've changed my contact form. Instead of it being bride and groom, it now says your name for whoever's filling out the form and then fiance's name. But, I keep saying, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I still don't know because, like we have Alex on here today. If I didn't know who she is, it could be a girl Alex or a boy Alex. And just because it's a feminine name doesn't necessarily mean that I can assume her role either. So yeah, so you would suggest just asking right off the bat in the contact form, like, what are your pronouns?
And that's a lot of people from my community when we're seeking services of anything. It can be, wedding, it can be event, it can be anything. We want the questions. We want to be asked. The biggest thing is to never assume anything, because our community, that's what our community is based off. We're of us being us, and not, not assuming anything.
Yeah. Now you've taken my workflow class. In my workflow class, I take the participants through every single contact I have with my clients, every email template, everything. And you've heard me stumble through this of like, well, so in this one, it says bride and groom, but like we send something different if it's a same-sex couple or, depending on the couple. Now I will say that, 99% of my couples are bride and groom. So I guess my biggest question with that topic is it okay to have a different email for different groups of people, or is that in and of itself, like exclusive, because you're like, well, you don't get this email because you're different, so you get this email?
No, if anything, it shows the opposite. It shows respect.
Okay.
Because I mean, it shows the person, and it shows the couple that you're willing to take the extra steps to care for their identities. It shows the care and everything. And now when it comes to like the wedding day, and as far as like the prep and like when you do like the timeline and everything, we do party 1, party 2, or we'll do bride, groom. We very much customize the timeline and the templates and everything, and it is an extra step, but again, it also shows respect for the couple, and it's not, a general example of what's going on.
And you know me, that taking those extra steps is what makes you great, and it gives your clients that feeling of being loved and cared for, seen and heard and understood. So that is really nice to hear. So yeah, that was kind of my next question, was the question or the timeline. I like that. So your language is party 1, party 2, in maybe certain situations, bride. Would you do bride 1, bride 2, or does it?
Yeah, so if it's like two brides together, we do bride 1, bride 2. Party 1, party 2 is more for like the
Wedding party.
The wedding party, exactly. I couldn't think of the word for a second. So it's more for the wedding party. So we do party 1, party 2. But for we'll do bride, groom. Or if they're non-binary, we do party 1, party 2.
Or could you just do like Brittany's party and Katherine's party?
Yeah, we've done that too. Yeah.
It's just a matter of having the conversation ahead of time.
Everything is all in the prep. Everything is all in the interview, all in the questionnaire. That way the day of, you're not you're still asking questions, but you're not assuming anything. Like you've already, like all the cards are on the table, and you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that pretty much wipes out a lot of the questions I really had, because I think a lot of the questions that we ask ourselves are these assuming questions. Like, well, how do I assume that they want to be posed this way? Or how do I assume that they want to be called a bride or a groom? But the answer, what you're saying, is that you just don't. You just ask, which is great, because that's just makes everyone's lives easier. But what was the question I had? Oh, yes. So here's one situation. Okay. As far as wedding parties go, now, is it okay to use terms like bridesmaids and groomsmen if everybody's okay with that? Or do you just stay away from that altogether in your world?
It depends on the couple. Again, if it's two, and it can be confusing if you have a bride and a bride, because you have bridesmaid. You know what I mean? So we definitely try to stay away from that as much as possible. Just because it can be confusing for, if you've got a timeline and they're like, well, I'm the bridesmaid party. Well, I'm the bridesmaid party too. You know what I mean? So we try to do party 1, party 2. But for the most part, yeah, we try to stay away from it.
Okay. Now Now, is it offensive if we had a couple that is just, very traditional bridegroom, man, woman, and then they have their very traditional all girls on the bride side and all guys on the groom side? Is it okay to still call them the groomsmen and the bridesmaids and like use the traditional terms, or is that something that like we shouldn't be doing at all anymore?
For traditional marriage ceremonies, or actually, I don't even like to say traditional because
I
they're all
know.
marriage. So a heterosexual marriage, I tend to still use bridesmaids and groomsmen just because that's what we're indoctrinated to use. I try not to as much as possible, but
Well, I've
yeah.
found a lot of times, because my prep is not where it should be as far as this topic goes. I a lot of times I assume that if I have a heterosexual couple and I'm seeing all men on one side and all women on the other side, that I'm just like assuming roles, and I'm assuming they're all heterosexual, and I'm assuming they're all and I've had it happen several times where and I've been calling them all bridesmaids and all groomsmen all day. Everyone seems happy. Of course, they're not upset about it or anything. But, then we get to the reception and I see them dancing with their partner. And I'm like, oh, no. And like, and I've actually had someone book with me recently. Actually, their engagement session is next month, based off of that experience. So I was like, well, I guess I didn't do too bad. But at the same time, I felt bad because I was using all these assuming roles. So again, I guess it brings it back to the prep, right? That maybe should be asking, hey, is everybody in traditional roles in your wedding party, or again, with the traditional? I don't know. Let's answer that question.
So, you can ask about the wedding party, but at the end of the day, when you're posing and stuff, and this goes to like, I think one of your questions was, how do you address them? Do you address them, sir or ma'am? That kind of thing. Especially like with the non-binary folks, it's just safe to use their name if you don't know their orientation. But when it comes to when you're posing and everything, I would just ask. Sometimes they'll let you know, or you can just ask like leading questions like, oh, is your spouse here? Is your fiance here? Is your, who are they? And try kind of get that kind of conversation going, because then they're like, oh yeah, my wife is over here, or my husband's over here, that kind of thing. Then you can kind of tell from that. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that's great. I think one of the questions in the Facebook group was about that, about what if we use the wrong pronouns too? Should we, I forget who asked it, but that was one of the questions, was what if we mess up? What do we do? And I asked that one time. I had a bridal or wedding party that was, there was, trans, there was all the things going on. And I was feeling very uncomfortable, just because the thing is, we don't know everyone's names. Like, you come on, I've asked the names, I have a list of names, but it was a huge wedding party.
Mm-hmm.
It was huge. I could not remember everybody's names. And I remember it being like, okay, what do we call everyone? Like, oh, we were going to call everyone like the party people. And I was like, okay, that's great. And I remember asking the groom, like right before, kind of, I almost want to say like going on, like before doing the wedding party pictures. And I was like, okay, Kevin, what do I do if I mess up? And he's like, well, one, don't. And I was like, really? Because, oh my gosh. And I was like, okay, but what if I do? What do I do? And he was like, just, apologize and move on. And he's like, that's all you can do. But thoughts
Yes.
on that?
Yes. So you want to try to get as much information in the prep as possible, but mistakes do happen. I myself, being a part of the community, being in the community, I've misgendered people before. And I've been like, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. And then From then on, I used the correct pronouns of, what they wanted to use. To give you an example, I have a really good friend that just came out as non-binary, and that was a really hard. I'm a grammar person. I'm English. I'm very strong, and using they them pronouns was very hard for me because we are taught that it's a plural pronoun, not a singular pronoun. And it wasn't until this good friend of mine explained it to me, I kind of am two people in one body, I'm neither I'm neither one. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me now. And it is an education, it is a learning curve, and you just apologize and move on. But I mean, yeah, that's the thing.
I think being willing to open yourself up to that apology is also saying something about yourself too. Samantha says in the chat, she said, I also think stating your own pronouns everywhere you're able to is helpful. Yes. It normalizes asking anyone and everyone, not just someone you assume is LGBTQ+.
Yes, exactly. We, in all of our, when we go to Pride and everything, so we do, with the Rainbow Rose Center, they host York County Pride every year. All of our stuff has she, her pronouns. We have all of our pronouns on our materials, on our marketing materials and everything. Anytime, we'll send an email or something, we use she, her pronouns. We have that set up in our emails. So it's pretty much, stated. And then, yeah, just letting them know.
Yeah. No, I think we've actually answered all the questions that people had, believe it or not. I mean, I think that my biggest takeaway so far has just been, the non-assuming, that just ask. I mean, that really wipes away most of the questions that most of us have, is you just ask, right?
And it can be awkward at first if you're not used to doing it. But at the end of the day, it's going to make that client relationship so much better, because they're going to know that you care. You know what I mean? They're going to know that you want to put in that, that respect and that work for them.
Yeah. And one other thing that I just kind of want to stick in there that I recently was talking with one of my couples about was, not always assuming that everybody is loud and proud and that they are willing to shout from the rooftops, their relationship. We were scheduling a session coming up, and they want to go to Longwood, and we all know I love shooting at Longwood. And I mentioned in our conversation back and forth about Saturday crowds, and they were like, wait, crowds? Because they'd never been there before. And if you haven't been there before and you're only going off of my photos, which doesn't, they don't show a single human being in the background. I mean, there are crowds at Longwood. And, people stand and watch you getting your pictures taken at Longwood. And I, had mentioned that. She's like, wait, crowds? I don't know. Like, I just, and I said, hey, I'm going to be there to stand with you. I support you, and I'll be there to stand with you. And they were like, we appreciate that. And that's why we booked with you, and we love you. But we also want to not be worried about people's reactions. And we just want to be able to enjoy our engagement session instead of worrying about what people think. And so maybe we could do it during the week. And I was like, sure, whatever you think.
I can't tell you how many times a day or how many times my wife and I get looks, we get comments, we get all kinds of things going out into our community and stuff. And sometimes, like when I first met Katherine, and I'm probably going to start crying, but I don't want to. When I first met Katherine, she was terrified to go into a public restroom. And that was huge for me. I'm like, why are you scared? It's a toilet. It da 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 da. And she's like, no, she's like, I can't tell you how many times I have had somebody come into the bathroom and try to come into the stall with me to tell me that I don't belong in here.
Are you serious?
Yes, yes. And it actually just happened to her. I want to say like 6 months ago. She called me from work and she goes, I just went into a runner's bathroom and this old lady followed me in and was knocking on the stall door saying, do you know you're in a woman's bathroom? And so I very much understand where that couple is coming from, because a lot of times when we are out in the community, we get comments, we get looks, we get, stuff like that. Now, we have thick enough skin now where we, can handle it. Our biggest thing, and we try not to go to too many things that we try to judge the atmosphere, we want to live our life, but at the same time, like there is that, that constant fear. Thankfully, though, we have not had anything. So my wife has a biological daughter named Morgan. She's my bonus daughter. She's my kiddo. And thankfully, we have not had any incidences where she's been with us and something has happened. I don't know if it's like the magic of kids or, having them around. Adults don't want to say anything if kids are around. But we're very thankful for that. I mean, but also at the same time, we do teach her that, people are going to question us because we are not the societal norm. We are different. And we teach her to embrace it as much as possible. But yes, I completely understand where the couple is coming from, because it can be incredibly unnerving to sit there and, have your photo taken and trying to enjoy your engagement session or, something like that. And then have somebody come up and, the whispers or the talks or anything like that. So, yeah.
And I will say that at the end of the day, we're still doing it on a Saturday because we judged that the stress over having to like get ready early over the stress over someone saying something was much more. So we are still doing it on a Saturday, but,
That's good.
I was glad that they felt comfortable enough to talk to me about it and bring it up. And, it opened my eyes to that thought too. Cause I was like, oh, well, I just assume that they're very comfortable in their, sexuality and their relationship that, I didn't even think that it would be a consideration at all. I'm like, oh, well, duh, they're human. I mean, nobody likes somebody to say something mean to you or to be put in the spotlight in that way. Like it's, yeah.
Yeah. And, especially for people who are just starting their journeys in our community, it can be very unnerving. It can be very off-putting. So having someone, like you that is kind of like, I call you like the mother hen, like you just take everybody under your wing and you're just like, you're safe with me. You can't even begin to imagine how valuable that is for somebody,
Probably the kindest compliment you could ever give me. Thank you.
Well, I mean, you are. I mean, you take everybody under your, your wing, and you're like, you're safe with me, and that's invaluable. You can't teach that to anybody. When working with anybody in any community, you can't teach that. Just having that compassion and empathy, you can't teach that.
But still, like I said bring it back to the beginning, you can have the biggest heart in the world and want to keep everyone safe and things, but this fear around using the wrong pronouns, around offending, around it's hard because I panic in moments. You saw me panic in the posing class where I'm like, well, I know it says here bride, but it could be anyone, or I'm like, I mean,
And I felt so bad. I was like, I wanted to so badly be like, it's okay, I understand. But like, I didn't want to interrupt the class at all either. So I would, but yeah, it is kind of can be almost like a minefield, navigating something new. And I feel like that's with anything new. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like personally, I'm more comfortable with people in my community. And, I might have issues going to shoot a hetero wedding. I might offend somebody. I might say something about somebody being in a dress and they're like, oh, I don't know. You know what I mean? So like it's different. So
In this day and age, you can offend anyone at any time very, very easily. So I think it really comes back to just the heart behind all of your actions. Are you trying to be a kind human being, or are you not?
yeah, yeah. And you know, in our industry, you have to be a kind human. You're not going to get the authentic reactions from the people that you're shooting. You're not going to get those authentic moments. You're not going to get those pictures that are, you know, magazine worthy or anything like that. I mean, you're not going to get clients if you don't have kindness.
Yeah. One more question for you that I just thought of. Now I would have to probably assume that anybody watching this is with us in the thought process, but you know, you might get a random person who's watching who is not necessarily accepting of the LGBTQ community. So you said that you went through a lot of different photographers, you know, inquiring and things like that, and you said that they weren't very welcoming. Is there a best way for someone who's not comfortable shooting an LGBTQ wedding to say it nicely, or to like, because I mean, you don't want to have a photographer who is not accepting be your photographer and pretend that they are. So I would have to assume that you would rather they turn you down than like accept it to take your money and, you know, shoot your wedding, even though they don't support you. Right.
Yeah, wholeheartedly 100%. I actually am one of the photographers that we inquired with. It was probably the nicest one. Said, I apologize, you're not my ideal client. You know, I wish you the best of luck. You know, that was straightforward, simple, but it wasn't like, oh, you're not my, you know what I mean? It just, you're not my ideal client. Okay.
Okay. So that felt a little bit better. Now, was there anything that was like really, really awful, like specifically that you can mention, or that, I mean, I don't want to put you in a position where you have to bring back something painful, but.
Oh, no. One of the photographers, it was actually a, Hanover photographer. I won't say names because I don't do that. But just like, you're not my kind of people. It's like, okay.
But that hurts.
Yeah, and you know, she went on to say that she doesn't support our marriage ideas and she's traditional. I said, okay.
So in your opinion, what would be the best way to say it? To like, if someone had a template email written up that was the nicest possible way to say that that you could walk away and just be like, yeah, okay, I get it, or something like, I feel like it's not like, it's never going to be a great situation. It's never going to feel good, but the best way.
I think one of the two ways is the fallback of I'm not available that day. Mm-hmm. That's one of the ones that you have. And then the other one is, I would say, you're not my ideal client. You know, I wish you the best of luck. And then giving them recommendations. If they know, like, if of other photographers that would be willing to work with LGBTQ people, you know, having that small little network. And I think that's what sets somebody aside over anything, you know, who wants to only shoot heterosexual marriage, you know, ceremonies. Having that, okay, I don't do this, but let me give you some examples of people who do and who would be happy to work with you.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So you can, and I think, in my opinion, I think the nicest way to say it is just to say, I'm not available, but here are some photographers I know that do shoot LGBTQ weddings that you might want to look into. So you're not even saying, you don't even have to say, hey, you're not my cup of tea, I don't do this, because that's still like, oh, you're over here and I'm here. If you can just say, I'm not available for your date, maybe it's a lie, but I feel like sometimes lying is the nicest thing you can do, and just say, I'm not available for your date. What I usually say is, I guess I do say I'm not available for your date. Sometimes I usually have like a blanket statement that's just, I don't want to shoot every single weekend of my entire waking life. So, I might be available for a date on my calendar, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to shoot that day because of whatever reason. So I think my template does say I'm not available for your date. I'm not saying I'm booked for your date. I'm not available because I don't want to shoot that day. So yeah, just saying I'm not available for your date. But here are some photographers that are great with the LGBT community. So taking those couple minutes to do a search and look and find some,
Yeah.
and
And a lot of times you can find photographers on like Keystone Business Alliance. They're huge with the LGBTQ plus community. Now they have a membership and everything like that. And I am in the process of getting registered with them. But like there's also like Rainbow Rose Center of York County. They have a preferred partners list. Getting on some of the preferred partners list of known organizations that do work within our community, that helps as well.
That's great. I wonder, Samantha, if you're still listening, if you're here, I feel like you probably know this because you know everything. I'm wondering if there is some sort of listing or something out there for the LGBT friendly community photographers. Like, is there a list somewhere of LGBTQ friendly photographers out there? I wonder. And also Alex says, when people say you're not my kind of people, I wonder if they would say the same thing to an interracial couple, probably. But yeah, go ahead, Samantha. Sorry.
That's okay. There are a couple different ones that I'm aware of. The biggest one is called Equally Wed,
Okay.
Which is the one that I know of. I know that there's a couple that are state specific, and there is one for Pennsylvania, but off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is. So I have to look and get back to you on that one.
See, I knew she would know.
I know, she's amazing.
She's like an encyclopedia of knowledge.
She is.
We love you, Samantha.
Thank you.
So maybe Samantha, if you have time, if you in your busy life, if you're able to maybe look that up and link it somewhere, maybe in one of my posts about this chat in our group, maybe that would be a good place for people to have a list of, photographers that they can list. That'd be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm currently parked in a grocery store parking lot because I have a session in like 45 minutes, but I really wanted to tune in. So
you're the best.
She is.
All right. Well, Brittaney, is there anything that I didn't ask or that didn't come up today that you think is really important that we should bring up in our talk today before we head off?
I don't. I have a question for you for venues. Okay. When you do, and I haven't quite, I've done mostly small elopements and everything like that, and one big wedding, but that was kind of different. For venues, when you have each party getting ready, have you seen venues kind of change the names of the rooms for people?
Some are. I think what you'll see is that it depends on their feelings on couples. There are some venues who wouldn't say that they necessarily support same-sex marriage, but they're not going to turn you down. But they kind of state it by, keeping the names, bridal suite, groom's quarters, or things like that. But I am definitely seeing a change. There's definitely a change happening. It gets like, what do we call it then? I think that's usually what people say is like, well, what am I supposed to call it then? This room's all like girly and feminine, and this room's all, dark dungeon with the games and stuff. So like, I mean, it definitely says, even if it doesn't say on the door bridal suite or groom's quarters, it like says feminine and says masculine, no matter what you call it. So I think that they kind of default to like, well, what am I supposed to call it if I don't call it a bridal suite? What should they call it?
Party one, party two.
There you go. That's the answer. Or maybe just not even having a name on the door. Do you have to call it something necessarily? Like, I mean, generally speaking, somebody's going to show them where they're supposed to get ready. It doesn't have to, there are some venues that have like a whole area, like a whole house on the side or something like that. So they don't necessarily have to call it like the bridal suite. It's just like the carriage house or the cottage or things like that, which makes it a lot easier because it's not like that one room at the venue in the back. But I think for the most part, like they don't even have a name necessarily on the door. It's just what they call it in the language when they talk about it.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, before we head off, because I know you're a busy person and you have things to get back to, do you mind telling us a little bit more about where we can find more of you? How can everyone check out your brand new awesome website and on Instagram and Facebook and things like that, so we can check out more of your work?
So my website is AdelynClairePhotography.com. Is a huge labor of love. It took us a while to get that together. Our Facebook page is AC Photo 20. And then our Instagram is Adelynn Claire 2017.
Yeah, wonderful. Guys, go give her a like. And if everybody is able to go to her page, send her a DM, give her some engagement and say thank you so much for your time and your willingness to kind of put yourself out there and talk about this topic that so many of us have wanted to learn about and are just kind of nervous to offend, to ask all these questions. So I'm so grateful to you for doing this for us. We really appreciate you and your time and your willingness to do this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for still coming, being sick and being amazing and being awesome and giving me this opportunity as well.
I'm totally going back to bed right away. I'll work on getting this online first, but I might do that in bed. So
There you go. Rest.
all right, you guys have a wonderful day. Love you all and hope to see you at the next one. Bye.